All right, let me do a screen share so people watching this online can see what we are discussing. Okay, this is actually an ancient tapestry, not ancient, but medieval tapestry of Sir Gawain fighting in one of the Arthurian legends. We don't see the pentangle on the sword here, or excuse me, the shield here, but there's a lot of stuff about Sir Gawain that is atypical in this story. The scribe who likely wrote down this story, didn't invent it, was very knowledgeable of Christian theology and inserted a lot of piety into Sir Gawain, which leads a lot of scholars to believe that he probably wrote the story down from an oral storyteller and then flushed it out a little bit more, imputing his own knowledge into the work, which makes sense because most scribes in medieval times would have been monks or priests who worked for noblemen. Okay, so let's talk about the author. Not much is known about the author, so what scholars deduce about the author can only be gleaned from what we see in the text. What type of knowledge does this author have about the world, about Christianity, about Arthurian legends, and then we can infer things from that, but we don't know for sure. As I mentioned, inferences can be made about the author based on the evidence we see in the manuscript. And Sir Gawain was not the only work published in this manuscript, but it was written in Middle English. But the poet no doubt had a deep knowledge of Christian teaching and courtly life. This is important to note because there would have been plenty of priests out there who would have been literate that could have written this, but may not have ever worked for anybody in court. So they would not necessarily have known the inner workings of what courtly life was like, whether it's in Camelot or in Berslac's castle. This is the sole surviving manuscript of the poem referred to as Cotton Nero AX. Just a little bit of English, well, specifically English manuscript textual scholarship. There was a lord whose last name was Cotton, who was quite a collector of books and works, and he had an organization system based on Roman emperors. So this manuscript was found in the Nero section, section A, number 10. Okay, that's what Nero, capital A, little x, means. But there was other poems in this as well. Cleanliness, Patience, and Pearl. And they're okay, but they're mostly kind of devotional poems that don't tell a story like this one does. Let's switch this to, oops. Okay. More on the authorship. The author's background and sense of geography are expressed in the poem. More likely a rural scribe as opposed to somebody from London. Well, how do they know that? Well, the dialect of English that is used in this comes from the north or northwest of England. And actually, I found a map to illustrate where a poet likely came from. Or the border regions in the Midlands here, in the northeast of Wales, middle of England, in this area. That's based on the dialect that they have. If any of you have read Geoffrey Chaucer, his dialect, London English, but they were writing at very similar times, within 100 years of each other. So the dialect shouldn't have been as drastically different as it was, but there was several different brands of English that were spoken. I would think of it, even though they're only a couple hours drive apart now. Think of how different, say, Jamaican English is from, I don't know, the northern parts of the Scottish Highlands. Yes, they're both technically speaking English, but the language sounds quite different. They might be able to communicate with each other, but it's going to be difficult. Okay, so back to the PowerPoint. Okay, as it mentions here, it's probably near the border territory of England and Wales, and that's really what this author knows. If we remember from Fit 2, really as we're hearing the story of Gawain traveling from Camelot, which is in the southwest of England, to where he finds the Green Knight, he's really describing going through Wales and that area of the British Isles. Okay, so who would have been reading this work? Between roughly 1,000 and about 1,500 in the Common Era, Arthurian romances were very popular. Romances in general, tales of knights and chivalry and of God, such as trying to find the Holy Grail, things of that nature were quite popular. Now, the earliest readers of these romances would have been people in noble houses. That's why a lot of Arthurian works are written in French. Because after the Norman conquest in 1066, for about 300 years, if you were a noble person in England, your first language was Norman French. It wasn't English. They spoke English because they had to speak to the help. But noble people would have spoken French as opposed to English. That's why English has so many French or Latin roots to our words. It's a cow in the field, but it's beef in a plate. Boeuf is the French word for cow. So we use the English word cow to describe what it is when it's alive, but it's beef when it's on our plate. Because the serving people would have called it one thing, but it would have had to know what the French word was to serve their masters. Now, as the Middle Ages progressed, more people had money, which means they could send their kids to school, which means more people could read, and they became more popular among the middle and upper middle classes, the merchant class that was emerging really after the plague in the 1350s. We owe a lot, actually, of modern science and convenience and knowledge to the Black Death, because all of a sudden there wasn't enough people around to do all the farming, to do all the government. So, noble people had to work, and regular people started learning, hey, they're not special. They're than me. I'm capable of learning to read too. And that's really what launched the Renaissance in Europe. Okay, so let's get to the text, some elements of this specific text. King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. That's where we begin and end with this text, with King Arthur. And they're celebrating Christmas, the first day of Christmas. Do you know what the first day of Christmas is? What date? I know we got a partridge in a pear tree. I don't know if anybody would like that many birds for presents. December 25th is the first day of Christmas. So the Christmas celebration starts on Christmas Day and moves to January 6th. That's when the wise men brought gifts to Bethlehem. Other things that's characteristic of this work is heroic deeds on the field of battle. Now, Gawain's battle is more of a mental battle because he doesn't do a whole lot of fighting. Sir Bersilac has to kind of fight, especially when he's fighting the boar. He's quite brave. They lose some dogs. his life's in danger at certain points fighting the wild boar. Chivalry at court, we see this right away with Sir Gawain because he is defending Arthur's honor by volunteering to take on the Green Knight's task. We have monsters. The Green Knight is, in essence, a monster. Morgan Le Fay, you could say, might fit that a little bit because she's disguising herself as an old hag. For those of you that don't know the Arthurian story, Morgan Le Fay is Arthur's older sister. She is his half-sister. They have the same mother. Arthur's father had so much lust for his mother, who was married to a man named Uther. Excuse me, Uther was Arthur's father. That he had Merlin cast a spell so that he could sleep with Arthur's mother. But the price of that was that Merlin got to keep the baby. And that's why Arthur is essentially raised in the shadow of Merlin. But Arthur's mother, Igraine, had a child already. That was Morgan Le Fay. Morgan, we see a theme that comes back from the ancient Greeks. Morgan casts a spell on Arthur so he'll sleep with her, and they produce a child. That child is who ends up killing Arthur. They kill each other in an ultimate battle at the end of his life. So Morgan is a witch who tries to borrow and often succeeds in borrowing Merlin's magic. But she ends up serving the purpose as kind of a trickster in a lot of these works. And clearly, this is the Morgan Le Fay prior to tricking Arthur into sleeping with her, producing a child that's destined to kill Arthur, and all that sort of stuff. Okay. Travel and exploration. You know, knights have to go on quests to be knights, right? Whether it's a quest for the Holy Grail, the quest for some medicine, the quest for adventure, to get rid of a dragon, as we see in Beowulf, or a quest to kill Grendel. These are themes that are prevalent in the Northern European consciousness, France, Germany, Scandinavia, England, and so on. Another thing that we see typically is sorcery, the use of magic in Arthurian legends. Okay, so the structure of the poem. It's divided into 4 fits. The first and last fit primarily deal with the introduction to the Green Knight in Camelot and the return to Camelot. As it mentions here, the poem begins and ends with King Arthur's court during the Christmas season. For some reason, it takes months for Gawain to find Bersalac's castle, but it only takes like 3 days to ride home. The 3 days of hunting at Bersalac's castle mirrored by the 3 visits of Bersalac's attentive lady to Gawain. And really, as you read that part of the text, they are meant to mirror each other in terms of the way that Bersalac's wife acts. She's a little coy on the first day, much more aggressive on the second day, and then tries to talk him into it on the last day. Well, you don't have a girlfriend. You think you're about to die. Why wouldn't you sleep with me? You're not going to get caught. So, you know, that last day, she's certainly more crafty. And then we have the 3 blows that are inflicted. In Western literature, we often see this, that 3 and 7 are numbers that recur over and over again, which makes sense based on Christian theology. You have the Trinity, and 7 would be the 7 sacraments and 7 deadly sins, of course. So we see that number recurring over and over again in these early works. Okay, that's the questions. All right, any questions about Gawain? What we should be looking for as we dig into this text? All right, well, let me go ahead and shut off the video I'm making, and we will start